I'm Anu Acharya. I was born in Bikaner, which is in Rajasthan. My dad was a professor of physics, and I think he was the first person to come out from his family and get a PhD, and then became a professor. We have about four siblings. Grew up in a small town called Kharagpur, which is based in Bengal. So I'm sort of more Bengali than than from Rajasthan. And I grew up in a small town, thinking that the world is pretty much the way I looked at it at that point, which was people read books, people did a lot of experiments, people went to IIT and did a lot of great things, right? So that was what my inspiration was early on in life. I did go to IIT as I had planned to. But then I think eventually over a period of time, I realized that, I was probably wanting to do physics because my inspiration was sitting at home in front of me. But maybe I needed to know myself better. And that's how I moved my career at some point of time. I think eventually around 98, 96, 97. But I think early on, my realization that I probably needed to move outside of physics came in the second year of college. So basically, I think once I had joined IIT and I realized that I needed to understand the person I am, I realized that there were my goal at that time, which was to win a Nobel Prize in physics, was probably a little far-fetched, and I did not want to become a mediocre scientist, right? And so one of the things then I looked at was, what are my strengths? And in many ways, I think my strengths were in creating relationships, putting people together, getting things done, and all of that. And I think I wanted to, as a result, I said, maybe the thing that is, better for me or wanting to do something was creating something was probably more suited to my DNA in many ways, right? And I think that was the reason why I said maybe it's a great idea to go ahead, get some degree in business. And so I went to the US. I finished another master's. So after I finished a bachelor's and master's, I went and finished a master's in the US. Then I got a second master's, and that was in the business school. But what was interesting was that the professor of physics, who was the head of the department, was a little unhappy that somebody who had written such a strong statement of purpose, who wanted to move away from physics into the business school. And so I sort of came up with a plan for the next few years. Of course, I was just making it up. But one of the things I told him was that I want to start my own company. I want to be able to get a sense of how it is in a startup, how it is in a large company, and eventually start my own. And it so happened that the next 5 years of my life were exactly like that, although I hadn't really planned for it. So I left, after I finished my second and third master's, actually, I worked for a startup company in Chicago. And that was probably one of the best experiences I had. Then moved on to a consulting firm. And then in 2000, I moved back to India. And at that time, I had just had a baby. So we basically had two babies at the same time. So the second baby was Osimo Bio. And this was the first company we started in the genomic space. And it was a time when there was pretty much, nobody knew much about genomics. There was no Google around that time. I think Google was just about starting. But in 97, 98, when we were looking at bioinformatics, looking at genomics, there was pretty much nothing that we could find. And I think that aroused my curiosity that, this looks like a field that is going to be exciting, that's going to be interesting, and it's going to have a long-term impact on our own on our own lives. And just so when the Human Genome Project got completed, we said, let's go ahead, let's start a company in this space. So moved back to India just when things were getting very, very comfortable in Chicago. Because I think that, for me as a person, I don't like things to be too comfortable. You need that little bit of discomfort to sort of move forward in life. And I think that's when I came back to India and started Osimo Biosolutions, which was the first venture that we started. And in this venture, we had three founders. One came from genomics, and there was one who was more a finance person, and then me, who was more a systems and the person who was going to be the face of the company. And eventually, I think we created a very interesting path for that company. We ended up, not just creating what we initially thought, which was actually to be in the plant genome space, but we ended up creating software, which we sold to a lot of the large companies. We ended up then buying three companies, one in Germany, one in Netherlands, and one in the US. We became one of the largest genomics services players worldwide. And it was quite an interesting experience because we had now acquired companies that were 1 point public. Some of them had valuations of 2 billion. And that's one of the things I tell people, that, valuations don't mean much unless you can sustain it. And so we bought these companies, created one of the largest, companies in the space. But that still bothered me, right? It still bothered me because when I looked at the data and I looked at the impact I was having to the people around me, I felt there was limited impact, because what we were doing was great. It was advancing science, but it was not impacting people. And I think that sort of bothered me, because I really wanted to do something that could really have a true impact on the people around me. And that's why we started Mapmygenome. But there were also two other factors that came in. One was that not many people focused around prevention. Most of the focus was on curation and using genetics or genomics for disorders or to find out or primarily to treat disease. But no one really said, let's go ahead, let's focus on finding out what makes us who we are, and therefore be able to prevent disease in the first place. So that was one of the things. And the second the second part that really made me start this was that there was very little Indian data, even in the data that we were selling. Right, we had a lot of great biomarker data. We were selling it to the large pharmaceuticals. We were selling it. The FDA used it as a gold standard. We had it at the US EPA. So it was a fairly well-regarded database, but still, I thought it didn't have enough representation from 1/6 of the population. So that was the main reason for me to really start Mapmygenome. So it's been about 8 years since we started Mapmygenome. And we started with one product, and this was a product that we called Genome Patri, because really felt that the Indian consumer needed to connect it with something that they already knew. And Genome Patri seemed like a good thing that you could connect with, because it sort of helps you to understand who you are, who you can marry, how your health is going to be. And in many ways, while this is not astrology, it still is helping you, guide you through those parts. So that's how we started, because today we are doing many more things than Genome Patri. We do a lot of clinical genomics. We do a lot of, we are putting together biochemistry and genomics in an attempt that currently no other company has done. There's still mostly in the research area. So I think that's, the person I am. I like to do things that are new, that are exciting, and I think that's partly because curiosity is in my DNA. I think in our case, and it's true that it's mostly male-led startups, and they're the ones who are getting most of the funding. But in our case, I think there are two factors that are coming in, right? We are trying to create a new category altogether, and I think in general, so far, I think we've seen that even male founders haven't found it easy to be able to come up with a new category. When you look at things like e-commerce and others, I think those are more household things, right? Everybody is used to buying a dress or something else. So I think it's easier for the average person to connect, and it's also easier for venture capital and others to connect as well, right? Because they start to look at it as a big market. Now, the truth is that when you look at Mapmygenome, it is it's exactly the same market that you can look at. So if you put in more funding, then you are probably going to not just have a company that can be very large and scalable, but you can also, I think, at the same time, do something that is much more meaningful from the overall health of the country, right? And I think that's a point that I wish people understood more. I'm not so worried about whether the focus or the limelight is on me. I really have not been. I'm not in that, but I would really like for DNA testing to become more pervasive, because in the end, I think that's what is going to make a difference. It's going to create an impact which is going to be much more meaningful than saying, do I have enough access to more clothes and more cosmetics, right? I think those are important. I'm not saying it's not. I've gotten used to doing only online shopping. But at the same time, I think if you are able to find things that are really, truly going to change society, I think that makes you feel much better than otherwise. And I think that's what drives me. I think one of the things that COVID really did was it brought to the brought everybody now came to know that there are things like DNA and RNA. So I'm even though I think it has been an absolutely horrible thing to have around, I think one thing that it did better than we did was to be able to educate the average person on what does health mean to you and what is DNA and what is RNA. And what we have seen is that if we had the ability to be able to do this on a wide scale, which I think in many ways, I think what we did with INSACOG and others was done after the fact that we started the pandemic. So the next time it will probably be easier. But I think the truth is that even science in India in general has not been getting the same amount of funding than it should be getting, because that's what is going to create a differentiation for the country. So both in terms of private sector, but also in public sector, I think there needs to be a lot more emphasis on how much funding goes into it, because that's what is going to create that infrastructure. And during COVID, we saw that, right? We saw that supply chains got cut off. We were suddenly left to fend for ourselves. And I think that capability building is very, very important. But what was interesting and exciting was the fact that we all came together. We were able to put together governments, academics, private sector. Everybody started working together, and I think that was exciting. That ultimately I think all of us have the ability to do something and to come together. And sometimes you need an external force to do that. And I think COVID did that. Growing up, I think my siblings were also, almost as, they've all done very well. Everybody went to IIT, my brother, my sisters. So they were obviously there. There were a lot of my friends. So I think the whole environment that I was in was pretty much focused around being, creating that sort of mindset in many ways. So that was one. But growing up, I think, I read a lot of books. I was inspired by a lot of scientists, whether it was Richard Feynman or Einstein and others. I would read anything I could find, get my hands on. I think as we moved towards the business world, what I realized was that there were many people who really helped you over that journey. And it's not easy to sort of say X, Y, and Z did that, but there are some people that you can really say that they really made a difference. There are people, for instance, people I've chosen on my board were people that I thought that helped me in getting to somewhere before they became my board members, and I think that sort of helped me in saying that they would be giving me right critical advice. For instance, one of the persons maybe I can name is Anula Jaiswal, and she's been on our board, both on Ossimum's board and Mapmygenome's board. And she has an MD, she's an MD, PhD, MBA from Harvard, and very well educated, but extraordinarily humble. And I think having people like her around you can, make you realize that, while you can be, very educated, very well listening, I think what really differentiates you from other people is your humility. And I think that's one of the things I learned from her. To be able to get connected to the real world of what's going on around you. There are people like Kiran Mazumdar, who has been very, if you need anything, if I've emailed her, even when she didn't know who I was, I think was able to go out there, help me and get things done. There have been others who have if I've written to them or I've called them, I think people have been very open to saying, I'll help you and get that done. But one of the things I've realized is for anything of this to happen, I think it requires both sides to sort of go out there and ask, right? So you ask for help, then it's a possibility you'll get it back, right? And I think a lot of people forget that finding that the right influence, the right mentors around you also requires you to reach out and get that. So for me, I think there have been many people. I think I have, I think I admire certain things about a few founders that I see around me. Some that I haven't met. Somebody like an Elon Musk who does, a lot of impossible. Maybe not everything about all of them, or a Steve Jobs, but I think those are interesting things about them in terms of how they package, how they present. But then I think also people like Dr. Renu Swarup, for instance, I think what she did at the Department of Biotech, I think was incredible, right? She put in together, she was there at the worst time of, putting during the history of DBT, managed to put in so many things that I think will last a lifetime. Putting diverse set of people together, putting all of those pieces of, where do you get the vendors, where do you get the suppliers, how do you create that sustainable, ecosystem. I think that was, for me also, she's the kind of person that inspires me, who can build something, create something. So I think maybe builders, creators, hustlers, designers, many things. I think there are different things that you imbibe from people. And so it's hard to separate one or two out, but I would say those would be a few names that come on the top of my mind. I think over a period of time, I think I'm more an entrepreneur than a scientist, but I think my heart is still, I think those don't go away. And I think that helps you, right? Because if you don't have that, the urge to look at knowledge in a way a scientist does, then you probably won't accept new things easily in your journey, even as an entrepreneur, right? So I think that is an exciting thing. I remember my dad, he was a scientist first and an entrepreneur also, right? In his heart. We constantly got new things that he was experimenting with. He's not an entrepreneur, I would say. He's more he would like to create new products, new things. He never really wanted to sell them, but even that, I remember the year he passed away. He was building something on putting some solar energy and this and that, multiple diverse things together. And he would tell me that this is what I'm doing. I've ordered this thing online, and he was in the hospital. He's still thinking about that. So I think that's the exciting part, that sometimes, each one feeds into the other, especially if you're in a field like genomics, because it's new, it's constantly changing. So if you have the mindset of somebody who doesn't think like a scientist, actually it becomes harder to be able to understand, why is it I need to make an investment in some new technology again, right? Because why is it changing? I have already made, X investment and I'm expecting a return Y. But I think having that scientific mindset allows you to be able to understand, one, what impact it can have, and two, why it is needed in the first place. So I think it has been very useful for me. And I think, in the end, I think scientists are curious, entrepreneurs are curious. So I think it helps, especially in a field like genomics, where I am. So I think as I was telling you, we became one of the largest genomic services players worldwide. But this was basically requiring me to be in the US for long periods of time, and in the Europe and in India all at the same time. So I think it was getting a little hard. So we decided to get a president for the US. And somebody with a fantastic resume, everything looked fantastic that was there. But I think in hindsight was a terrible choice, right? And so we went through really a tough time in the US. We eventually decided to sell off parts of the company, and I think from that, in many ways, I think it gave me time to reflect and time to think. about what really I wanted to do next. So I think failure is an absolutely fantastic thing, because if you are constantly going towards a path of up and up, you stop to reflect, and I think that's a very important part of what you want to do as an entrepreneur, because every business will have that ups and downs. So I think that having failure at some point of your time teaches you things that otherwise you would not have, right? It is a little harder to teach that, and I think we've seen that in some of the when you see the some of the founders who think that this is you raise money and you raise money and you raise money, but you don't think about creating a sustainable business. I think for them it'll be very hard when they actually face reality. Right? So that is one thing that I feel is important. The second thing about failure is that we've had examples where we had to cut off products, right? We created something which I thought was nice, futuristic, fantastic. We had created a proteomics product in 2002, 2003, right? We wanted to create that. To my mind, at that point of time, it sounded like a great idea because it was new, it was exciting. But at the same time, I think it was an utter failure. The product didn't work very well. There's another product called NutriBase that never made it to its to life. And I think part of that was we were unable to find out, who really needed that and whether there was a large enough market for us to really spend the energy in building something like that. And I think that teaches us that it's not just about creating a product, but if the product is not reaching the end intended user, then the value of that becomes much lower. Right? So I think we've learned a lot about failure, and it is part of the journey, right? And I think one of the things that I think is sort of ingrained in a lot of Indian parents and households is that you have to do well, and I think we always tell children not to to look at failure as being something negative. But I think if you allow people to make mistakes, and we do that in the company as well, right? Many times someone comes up with an idea, let them go through it with it. And if there's a mistake, if we learn something out of it, it's great. If we don't learn something out of it, you learn that to not make that same mistake again. Right? And the products that I was telling you about, I think ultimately they help us in creating a foundation for something else. So I think failure is basically a learning, but the quicker or the sooner you accept that, you can use that to create something else. And I think that's the real value of understanding, accepting, and moving on from failure. I think in many ways, people are, many people, for instance, have come up to me and said that, they heard me speak somewhere and they've created a new venture. And I think I feel great when I hear people who come back to me and say that. That was one. The second is that, many times people are coming up, especially young girls who are interested in creating a new venture in this space. Many of them do reach out to me to be able to get some help. And while I can't do it for everybody, I think there are a few people that I can find a connection, I can also find a connect with, that I always will help them out, because I know that there have been others who have helped me out as well, right? So in many ways, it's like paying it forward. And I think in other small ways, right? I think, the environment, for instance, like my dad created for me, which was, go out there, you make your own mistakes. I don't know if I've ever told this story, but he was really somebody who allowed me to make mistakes when I was a child. And there was one where I won something in the newspaper at that time. There was no internet. And I got a letter saying, you won some first prize. And for obviously something my dad knew was completely useless. But he said, go ahead, make this mistake, right? He didn't say make this mistake. He said, let's go to the post office, collect your prize. So he paid the money that he was supposed to do, collected the prize, came back. There was a mixie for us. Right? And this mixie was, we put some water and we turned it on and the water spread all around us. Right? Obviously, it wasn't working. But my dad didn't scold me, didn't say anything. He laughed and I also laughed, and he said, we got a free shower. Right. And and then he explained to me later, and he said that I wanted you to make this mistake because if I told you that don't do this, you would have probably had something against me saying that my dad doesn't let me do things the way, do what I think is rightfully mine. But if you do it yourself, you'll understand that, sometimes you might be doing something that's wrong, or there are mistakes, and you learn, right? And I think that, that's a similar environment I'm creating for my children as well. So I think that's in many ways, I think, sort of, what you have got, some of it you give because you've got it, like, without involuntarily, and others, I think you make an effort to sort of reach out and do your bit to be able to do that. And I think part of the reason I write a lot, I speak a lot, is so that I wish that there are many more young people who would do something more in science. It's interesting you bring up designer babies, because many times when I talk about the future, I do put in that term, right? I mean, I put in terms like designer babies, CRISPR, this thing, and all of that. And what is interesting is that the term designer baby sticks in a lot of people's mind, right? And I tell them that this is not something that we are doing or intend to do. But I think it's something that in many ways, I think when we look at science fiction rather, right? What really sticks in our head is more a dystopian view of the future in some ways, right? I mean, when you look at a lot of the science fiction, stories that are out there, but there are also some that actually show the positive aspects of it. And I think that's partly how the larger masses start to think about, all these terms. So in my presentation, I'll have 10 things, but the one thing that sticks in their brain would be the thing that would be either a dystopian view of it or something completely utopian, right? Not the real life things that are currently going on. So I think that's the thing, that's how human brain works. And I think it is fine. I think, and every technology has its good thing and the bad thing. The way we are looking at it is that when you look at genomics, you have to understand that there are two aspects of the data that you're doing, right? One is that when you're looking at science in general, all of us have progressed because of the previous people that actually created that data, right? So if I'm saying that, from Genome Patri, I can tell you the risk of, that you have some condition. It's not that Mapmygenome has done all the work in being able to do that. It was the work of thousands of people that have done that we can now actually progress that to the next level, right? Science is always incremental, even though it sometimes appears to be, sudden, right? But it's because there has been a base that has been created. So one is that data, right? That you have anonymized data that is valuable from building any sort of system, prediction, or just advancement of knowledge, right? That would be what I would say is science for science purpose. And then you also have something that can potentially identify you as an individual, that sort of can say that, Anu has a predisposition to, let's say, diabetes or something else. And then I'm targeted, right? So that would be a problem where my data is associated with me and is available to potential people like your employers, people like insurance people, somebody that can misuse that data. And I think that for most genomics companies, everybody would have taken that into account, or at least that's the way we look at it, right? So you look at saying that when we collect data from someone, you have to, one, tell them what this means, and two, how do you use that data if you do, right? So when people don't consent for that data, that can never go into the database. But if they do consent, then the data that will be used will be anonymized, right? So if I'm saying that I collect, say, 1 million data points, there's a possibility that 70%, 80% have said, go ahead, use my anonymized data. And then those 70, 80% of that data would be data that would be used in aggregate format, right? It's not something that you would use as identifying you or me in that database. So I think that's the differentiation, that the personal data is very different from the overall data that you might use in research. So I think that's the design that we've taken right from the beginning. And I think most companies that are in this space would also have probably done that, right? Creating the right kind of consents, whether it is in terms of understanding what its purpose could be, what are you going to get out of it, and also educating the end user on what that is. So I think that's the thing that we are doing. But what will happen in the future, I think we can imagine, of course, but in the end, whether we'll have designer babies or whether we have, some scary looking monsters, or whether we'll have a completely unequal world depends on many more things other than science, right? There is a capability part of it, and then there is a regulation part of the whole process, and then there is value that ultimately humanity looks at. So I think, in my view, I believe that humans in general will opt for a more inclusive and a better world rather than creating something that is going to be really bad for us, right, in the long run. So that's my hope. Of course, I'm not the one who's creating all the regulations and policies around whether it is designer babies or otherwise, right? But that's my hope, and at least what we are doing is more to help people read that code and make lifestyle choices based on that. So what we are doing is not really changing anybody's genetic code. All we are doing is we're saying, this is what your genetic code says, and these are the markers that are there, and this is what predisposes you to X, and what you can do about it, right? So we are now combining genomics, we are combining it with blood tests and saying that, can we give you a score? Can we help you, guide you through that process? Ultimately, you are the person who's driving that, right? So you are the one who's sort of saying, if I'm at risk for diabetes, my HbA1c is getting worse, what do I need to do, right? So that's what we are helping people with. We're not helping people make designer babies. I think maybe the one, one thing that I would probably help myself do is to maybe have chosen, I don't know if I would have actually given myself advice, but if I did, I think I would have taken a few more courses early on, because before I could make a decision. For instance, when I said I wanted to go to IIT, I think because that was what I could see at that time. So it is a little hard to say that, at that point of time, could you have given yourself a different piece of advice? I think at that time that seemed like the best choice. And genomics wasn't there. There was no human genome. So it's a little hard to say that I would change any of that. But if I did, I think one of the things I would do is to maybe read a little bit more on biology. I think I read it only till 12th grade. So I would have probably done a little bit more if I knew what I was going to do in the future. But none of us know what we're going to do in the future. So I think I'd probably just leave it at that and not give myself advice. So what I mean is that, you can create a business that, that relies on, for instance, funding to be able to get to X, to a certain stage. But when I'm saying sustainable, I think 2-3 things. One is that when you look at sustainability from a growth or profitability perspective, I think one of it is that, right? To say that, can you create a business that will be long-term and sustainable, that will continue to, feed, fend for itself in many ways, without having external, input into that company. That would be one. The second is that when you look at it from a preventive healthcare point of view, right? What we are hoping to get people to, empowering people to do is to be able to use prevention as a means to their health, right? So, I mean, one of the things we say is that prevention is not only better than cure, prevention is the cure, right? So in many ways, you can you can actually rely on your own body and the tools that your body can do to be able to actually lead a healthier life. And I think those are, in many ways, that's more sustainable than saying, can we take the example of, we're falling sick and then going to a hospital? I think that is, there's a lot more reliability on external factors versus if you know yourself better, there's a possibility you will continue to sustain and lead a more healthier life, right? So that could be another way of looking at sustainability. And the third could be that, the choices that people make, right? One of the things that our team does is to guide people towards more conscious choices in terms of what you eat, what lifestyle choices. And I think one of the things there is to enable people to think towards sustainability in some way. Right? So I think those would be the 3-4 areas that different uses of the word sustainability, but ultimately all leading to a healthier, happier, more, a world that is a little bit more self-sustaining in itself. We did a survey amongst our team, right, and all the men and the women, and I asked them one question, saying, "What did you think you would become when you were in 12th grade? And what is it that you have become? And are you happy with your choice? Are you not happy with your choice?" And what was interesting was that pretty much no one did what they thought they were going to do when they were young to what they're doing today. So I think one thing I want to tell people is that your future is going to be very different from what my future was. And therefore, I think what is important to understand is and learn is to be able to be more analytical, to be able to be more creative, and to be able to learn those skills that you can apply in many different fields. So that was one learning that we got. And the second thing was that if you do something that is meaningful, like for instance, what we are doing at Mapmygenome, I think it makes you feel better, right? And so what drives you will continue to sustain you over a long period of time would be things that you truly believe in and are passionate about. So I think those are the two things that I want to tell people, that don't get bogged down by, the career choices that are lying in front of you. Can I choose chemistry, biology, this, that? But I think to be able to say that, can I pick up skills that are going to be helpful in the long run, which might not necessarily be learning a specific subject per se.